Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing The New Frontier by Darwyn Cooke. This is the complete edition of it, both volumes 1 and 2, plus the annotations and the one-shot, I think it was an annual or a special, to commemorate the launching of the animated series, Justice League The New Frontier. It's the first comic book that I've done for this. The format's going to be very similar. I'm going to talk about the author, go into a brief overview of the plot without spoiling it, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend it to, and what I'll be reading for next time. Darwyn Cooke both wrote, penciled, and inked this. He did have a colorist named Dave Stewart, but almost everything else he did, including character design, plotting, the whole nine. And Darwyn Cooke, is, I read a little bit of his background. Before writing this, he worked on some animated series, most notably Batman the Animated Series, which I'm assuming was like the 93 animated series, as well as Men in Black. And then after this, or right before this, around the same time, I think this came out in the mid-2000s, so 2005, 2006. He also worked on Batman and Catwoman stories for DC. He sadly passed away about 4 years ago, 2016, and by almost all accounts, this is kind of his magnum opus. What this is, The New Frontier, is a retelling of the DC Comics universe between the end of World War II up to the election of John F. Kennedy, or up to, I don't know if it's the election or his running, but from 1945 to 1960. And what the book is, without kind of spoiling it, is about really the formation of the Justice League of America, how they came together previous to the formation to kind of fight one big bad. But it really is more than that. I think it's Darwyn Cooke's kind of love letter to the comics of the Silver Age, but also to war comics, so comics that were around, that were published about the Second World War. So you have in the annotations him talking about stories where soldiers found themselves on an island and had to fight dinosaurs, stories of pilots in World War II. And so it's all kind of intertwined there, and they also kind of, there's a large section of the book which is about real life people inspiring the superheroes. So you have Chuck Yeager interacting with Hal Jordan, who goes on to become Green Lantern, and things like that. You also have Superman and Wonder Woman, their interactions and them kind of working with the government, because in this there is a law that's passed similar to The Incredibles and similar to Watchmen, where the government has outlawed superheroes, unless it's similar to Dark Knight Returns, where superheroes are, in essence, banned unless the government sanctions their actions. And this takes a little bit less of a role in this work than in others, but basically this means that Superman and Wonder Woman are sent to Laos as government assets to quell the violence there, or to take sides, as it were. And you get an interaction with them, which is probably one of the better interactions in the book, between two characters where they're coming at the problem from two different angles. So you have Superman, who is a peacekeeper, and Wonder Woman, who's clearly a soldier, and how they both see the world is very different. And that, I'm rambling a little bit, but if you have read Kingdom Come, there's a scene in there that's very similar. That's also very good. It's really good in this as well. If you've read Astro City by Kurt Busiek, there's a scene between the Superman analog, who I believe is Samaritan, and the Wonder Woman analog, who I believe is Winged Victory, in that that's really good as well. But so that's really The New Frontier. It also touches on the real life social issues in America at that time. What America was going to be, who was going to be for, where do superheroes fit into that, and it's also a passing of the torch from the Golden Age superheroes to this new breed of superheroes. So you see things like the origin of Green Lantern, the origin of Martian Manhunter, and the Flash, Silver Age Flash. I really love this. Some positive things. It's impossible to really read this and not be struck by the artwork. The way I would describe it is kind of a cross between Norman Rockwell advertising art and design in the 1950s and 60s and the kind of Bruce Timm style Batman animated series. So you kind of cross all three of those and you get kind of Darwyn Cooke's art style, which is great. He has kind of a mastery of a 3-panel layout, which I'll talk a little bit about, which worked for me for the most part. It's a big story. There's a lot of characters. He juggles a lot of balls, and I think he does that relatively successfully in this. I think there's definitely places that I may have cut as an editor, but I think for the stories he's telling, overall it works. There's a series of different art styles. Even he has kind of that standard art style, but in the book he also basically recreates newspaper print style. In the book, there's a part where he recreates basically a children's storybook. There's a part where he creates what would be kind of a historical document. So he kind of has a mastery of these different styles that he kind of has on display that's really impressive. I think he does a very good job of kicking off the story in the right place. He has what accounts to like a one-page, if you were watching a Star Wars movie, it would be like an opening scroll. That part is perfect. It kind of gives you everything you need without giving you anything you don't need. Puts you basically right in the middle of the action. The first part of the story, again, I don't want to spoil it, it is really, really sets a really great tone for the feelings that you're going to get for going forward. It definitely, I think, basically putting aside all of the parts about the social construction of the country at that time and the issues that we had, it overall is really an action book, and I think he captures that action sequence extremely effectively. Throughout the book, there's a series of flash pages that are really effective. He has an eye, like I said, for action, and they're just really breathtaking to look at. I think that he also has character moments in it that really nail the characters. There's kind of the meeting, again, I don't want to spoil, between kind of Superman and Batman, where Superman is flying to meet Batman and he overhears Robin saying something, and you kind of see Superman smiling. That was kind of a great moment. So it's just kind of, it's about, the 2 volumes make up about 420 pages. You can read this relatively quickly, maybe a day and a half, depending on how motivated you are to finish it. But I definitely enjoyed this, and I definitely found myself thumbing through it. If I had kind of qualms with it, they're relatively minor. I think there's times where there was some dark print in the panels where that made it very difficult to read what was being written there. I think there was times where there may have been some continuity stuff where it's unclear which city you're in. I think there's some coloring that kind of differs from page to page and panel to panel, making it difficult sometimes to tell which characters are which. I will say some of the characters that he uses in this are relatively obscure. The Challengers of the Unknown and the Losers and the Suicide Squad and kind of the 1945 version of the Suicide Squad. Those are all kind of relatively obscure characters, and I think the book suffers sometimes because you have to kind of tell apart different characters, and sometimes it's not always easy. I think he realizes that, and he kind of makes a comment of the annotations that proves slightly difficult. I think he does kind of a workaround by trying to refer to characters by their names, and so you know who the different characters are, even though sometimes it's a little bit difficult to keep track of them. Like I said before, the 3-panel layout works for the most part. I think the places where it doesn't work, there were times where I had to reread a series of panels to kind of understand what was happening. That happened a couple times. It wasn't very frequent, but when it did, it was one of those things where I think if an extra panel had been put in there with a little bit more detail, it would have been more effective. Again, it wasn't very often, but it did happen from time to time. Like I said, it is kind of a large story, and so sometimes the pacing is a little difficult to take hold of. I don't really know if he would have been better to have. The story is kind of the story that he wants to tell, and the story is both action-oriented, and it is also about kind of social issues in America between 1945 and 1960. Ultimately, it becomes about action, and he tries to kind of blend those two together. I think the social stuff does eventually take a backseat to the action stuff. I don't know if that's going to bother some people. It definitely, for me, the social issue stuff wasn't as effective. I'm glad it was there, and I think it grounds the book in a way that if he had not included it, the book just wouldn't be the same. But ultimately, that part of it works a little bit less effectively for me. That being said, it's a really fun book, and the only other thing I can think of to say, I'll get into kind of my recommendations. I would recommend this to basically any comics fan because it is self-contained. If you get the version that I have that I showed earlier, there are annotations in the back that kind of break down some of who the characters are if you get a little bit lost. You don't really need to know any of them going in forward. Obviously, most people, I would say, know who Batman and Superman are. But even the more obscure characters, I think he does a good job of laying out, giving them introductions and kind of showing you who they are. And if you missed that, then you at least get the annotations to kind of catch that. I don't think that really detracts from the book. The more you know about the DCU going in, I think the more you will enjoy this because I think there are Easter eggs for people. So I would recommend that to those people. I think there is overall it's not a grim and dark book. There is violence in it, but it's more of a cartoonish violence. I think I'll say this: if you are giving someone a comic book to get into comics, superhero comics, you can't really give them Watchmen. I wouldn't give a 16-year-old Watchmen. I wouldn't give a 16-year-old Dark Knight Returns because I think those are a little bit too mature for those audiences. Other than some period-specific language in this, and it's only a few instances, this to me would be the perfect book to give a 16-year-old to get into comics. This is maybe one of the best superhero comics I've ever read. It looks great. Every page is kind of a delight just to read, just to see, because the style is so unique. The design work, I didn't mention before, his design work of kind of trying to imagine what space age technology would have looked like in the 50s and 60s, I thought was really impressive. So yeah, I definitely recommend this to anybody who hasn't read it. Darwyn Cooke, The New Frontier. If you are someone who's more read comics and have had a history of it and you haven't checked it out, I also would recommend that you check it out. Because if you do have previous information as far as DCU stuff, I think there's a lot in there for you to catch. But I really, really enjoyed The New Frontier. So next time I'm going to be reading Hotel Honolulu by Paul Theroux, who I have not read before. But until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter. Until next time, bye.